The staff of the Tuscaloosa News and TideSports.com join WVUA 23's Jenn and Chapman at Wilhagan's Grill and Tap Room for an in-depth analysis of the Crimson Tide and SEC football. This is Tide Sports TV.
Welcome into Tide Sports TV, live from Wilhagan's every Monday night at 6 p.m. in downtown T-Town in conjunction with the Tuscaloosa News and WVUA 23 News. I'm Jenn Chapman. Joining me for the big picture, brought to you by the Soup Store, is Cecil Hurt from the Tuscaloosa News. Cecil, a huge win for Alabama over Georgia. Is there a chance now that Alabama is back in the SEC West race?
Well, they were always in the race. They just had to win games. You know, it's probably helped them as much for Florida to beat Ole Miss. I mean, obviously they had to win and have to continue to win, but they weren't out of it after one game. People place way too much emphasis, particularly in September, way too much emphasis on what happens in the first game or the second. And you remember this time last year, you know, Mississippi State's number one and Ole Miss and they're on the cover of Sports Illustrated and you know, they're the center of the college football universe. And I got to Atlanta in December and looked around and they were still in Mississippi. So, you know, that's the way that goes.
And Saban made it pretty clear today that the media or anyone else who's putting it out there that Alabama's not the real deal. He believes in his team. What did you think about his comments today?
Well, people have to understand. When he does those things, he's not particularly interested in talking to the media one way or the other. He has a message for his team, and I'll guarantee you his message for his team in the locker room was the exact same message that he said in his press conference about you know, people had him dead and, you know, coming back, and you've got to focus and you've got to concentrate on every game, and it's all about the next week. You know, there is not people say, oh, he was mad that people said that they were dead. Nothing makes him happier than for somebody to say something negative so he can call the team's attention to it. You know, it's amazing that people believe when he says, oh, you know, I tell him not to listen to that. He's the one who's going to tell him that. You know, of course he wants them to listen to that and be motivated by it.
And almost like they relished a little bit in the role of underdog, something that they're not used to and something that they really took on. And some of the players even said that kind of role excited them.
Yeah, no, I do think that. I do think that it was, you know, it's a rare opportunity for them to play in that role, to have a chip on their shoulder, to be able to say that people don't believe in them, and to have something to go out and prove. You know, for the most part, they're expected to win every week, and that gets old. And so I think that they were glad to have the opportunity to play as an underdog for at least 1 week.
And as you alluded to before, last year a different situation with Mississippi and Ole Miss, and now this year the SEC West, it's still so early to say who's going. How about the SEC East and what you think about Florida and what they are doing so far?
They've done a great job. They've had 2 big wins at home. Now they've got 2 big games coming up on the road, back-to-back at Missouri and at LSU. It's going to be tough for them to win both those games. And just like Alabama wasn't out of the race when they lost to Ole Miss, Georgia's not out of the race just because they lost to Alabama. They go up and win at Tennessee next weekend. They're in control of their own destiny. Again, people they attach so much to these games in the first half of the season. There's 2/3 of the season left to play, most of the conference games left to play. So, yeah, Georgia didn't look good Saturday. And that doesn't mean that they can't get back to Atlanta. They should be better than those. They're favored a couple of points against Tennessee. They should be better than those teams they played. Will Florida be a tougher game? Sure, but all your SEC games in the West are very difficult, and for the most part in the East. And you know, Georgia's already got Vanderbilt behind them, so they've got some challenge, and South Carolina, so they've got some challenging teams. But Florida's in a good position, but we'll know a lot more about Florida 2 weeks from now in terms of where they stand in the East.
And Georgia was a tough opponent for Alabama, no doubt about that. But they still have more on their schedule. What, to you, is going to be the toughest SEC opponent that's on their schedule?
Well, they need to focus on Arkansas first. Arkansas's physical. They'll come in here. I don't know if they're defensively quite where they need to be to come into Bryant-Denny and win. But if Alabama turns it over 5 times like they did against Ole Miss, if they don't channel their emotion correctly, the same thing can happen. Then they've got a road trip at Texas A&M. Texas A&M's undefeated. Got an off week this week. They'll be full house. They'll be crazy. It's a 2:30 CBS game. So that's a big game. And there's just no sense in looking even past those until you know how those turn out. If you win those, then Tennessee's a big game. Then LSU's a big game. Then Auburn's a big game. But we'll see what happens against Arkansas because, like I say, the narrative changes so much from show to show, from week to week.
And it feels like every game's a big game when really one loss on a schedule can knock you out of the playoffs, potentially. Right now, Alabama, how are they looking in the big picture in the nation?
They're fine. Nobody knows who's going to go undefeated, if anybody. Which conferences. The weaker your conference, the better chance you have to go undefeated in your conference. So Clemson helped themselves by beating Notre Dame, in part because they don't play very many other tough teams. They'll play Clemson and Florida State will play. One of them will lose. If the other one goes undefeated, they'll have a pretty good chance to make the playoff. And with not very good schedules. But that's the way that works. Same thing for Ohio State, Michigan State. Now people are saying, oh, look at Iowa, look at Northwestern. And I do think Northwestern's win over Stanford was a big win. Iowa beat Wisconsin 10-6. I've seen Wisconsin. That's not an earth-changing outcome. But there's a good chance that Ohio State, no matter how inconsistently they play, is going to end up the undefeated champion of that conference, and they'll get in. So until we know who's going to win these conferences, until we know how the Big 12 is going to shake out between TCU, Baylor, and Oklahoma, there's just no sense in talking about what somebody's chances are. UCLA certainly didn't help their chances this weekend by losing to Arizona. So teams that lose games like that, Ole Miss certainly didn't help their chances by getting blown out at Florida. Georgia certainly didn't help their chances. Notre Dame, partly because they don't have a huge game. Southern Cal's a big game on the back end of their schedule, but they'll have a tough time helping themselves too. But it's just too early to see. And what they did last year with the committee was they took 4 conference champions, decided which 4 of the 5 were best. That's what they'll do this year.
So I'm going to skip us predicting who are the 4 teams that are going to be in the conference because, like you said, it is too early
Ben
to
will
tell.
do that. That's
You'll let Ben do that? Leave it up to Ben.
4 teams.
Let's go to the offensive identity. It's something that's been discussed the whole season. Mm-hmm. Did Alabama create an identity against Georgia?
I thought so. I thought they were obviously going to run the ball first. I thought Jake was very much in control, very much played within himself and his ability. I thought that they were physical. They weren't perfect. People confuse identity with perfection. But, they were able to run. They were able to play action off the run for a touchdown to Calvin Ridley. Certainly it helps when you get 14 additional points, 7 from special teams, 7 from defense. But the offense scored 24 points and controlled the clock, kept it physical, kept Georgia's offense off the field for a pretty good amount of time. Need to have longer drives, need to convert on third down better. I mentioned that Sunday, and people are like, oh, it's such a great win. How can you say that? Well, you still need to be better than 1 for 12 on third down. Stay on the field.
And as the season progresses, I'm sure that's what they want to see. They're getting better each week, and third down is going to be, it's even more crucial going into the playoffs.
Yeah, they're in the bottom 20 in the country on third down conversions. Now, they create that for other teams, but they got to be better themselves.
All right, that's all the time we have with Cecil right now, but he will be back later on in the show to answer your questions that we get from the TideSports.com message boards. So we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Tide Sports TV, live from Wilhagan's every Monday at 6 p.m. Joining me now is Ben Jones as we go inside the Tide. We're going to get some more in-depth analysis about Alabama's team, their win against Georgia, and the biggest storyline's got to be Jake Coker. What did you think about his play against Georgia?
I thought it was definitely his best game of the season so far, and it was probably made more impressive by the conditions that he had to play in. Going into a hostile environment, his first real true road start, because the season opener in Dallas was a neutral site. It's a little bit different than when you go between the hedges in Athens for a game like that. Also, having to contend with a wet ball, breaking in some new receivers still. There was a lot going into it, a lot that could have gone wrong. 2 really good pass rushers for Georgia, but he turned in his best game of the season yet. I thought it was really encouraging to watch Jake play that well.
I think it also shows how much he's connecting with these receivers now and that they're building a bond between each other. It looks like he's more comfortable, looks like they're more comfortable. What would you say about that? Is it just because he's now getting the number 1 reps day in and day out at practice?
Yeah, this has been 2 or 3 weeks now that he's been the starting quarterback, and there's not been any question of it at all going into practice, and that makes a big difference. Keep in mind, this is an offense that had to rebuild its passing game more or less from scratch this year. You have a new quarterback, you have 3 entirely new receivers, you have a tight end coming back, but even he wasn't quite as productive as a big part of the offense last year as what he's been this year. It all had to start all over again, and I think this week you could really start to see it move forward.
And what would you say are his strengths that Alabama can build around? Something that, I think in the beginning of the year, people were really concerned that he may not be able to be the leader of this team. Well, now he's showing that. What are some of those strengths that are leading to that?
I think he's not going to make some of the mistakes that a lot of people were worried about. I think coming out of the Ole Miss game when he had some of the interceptions, there was a lot of concern over whether he was going to be able to manage the game and manage the team in the way that Nick Saban tends to like his quarterbacks to do. I think that this week you really were able to see that when Alabama ran the ball like it wants to run the ball, he was able to manage the game like they want the quarterback to manage the game. I think that before Derrick Henry came out, I think he had 26 carries on Alabama's first 49 plays. So more than half of the plays weren't just runs, because there were some Kenyan Drake plays in there as well, but more than half of them were Derrick Henry runs, and that was able to set up some of the play action. And when he gets in situations like that, he's not a guy who's going to pull the trigger too soon. He's going to make sure that the play is there before he lets go of it. That's, I think, what they're really looking for from Jake Coker.
And I think he's also showing he can run as well.
Yeah.
He's not afraid, so that's a good positive there. Since you went to the running game, let's go there. Talk about Derrick Henry. One of the questions asked was this his best game to date, or what would you say is his best game to date this season in an Alabama uniform?
I think it was probably his best game this season. I don't know if he had a better game maybe against Oklahoma a couple years ago. I wasn't covering the team at that point. But I thought that for what they needed him to do in this game, like I mentioned, with these conditions, they were really going to put the offense on his back and require him to carry the team. And he was able to do that. Just because he didn't go out and break a couple of big, long runs like he did against Wisconsin, I think some people might want to look at that game and say that he played a little bit better. But I think that doesn't really give enough credit to Georgia's defense and for how big of a part of the game plan he was this week. For my money, it's probably his best game this season.
Now the other person getting some carries, Kenyan Drake, hasn't really broken out the way people thought he would. Is there still time for this to happen, and what's he going to need to do to be that breakout running back that they need?
Yeah, I think that this was just a game where some of the conditions weren't necessarily going to be so conducive to him really having a strong performance. Like I mentioned, the field was wet. You could see it was a little bit tougher to make some cuts. A guy like Derrick Henry was probably going to be a little bit more effective just going straight ahead, or just putting his foot in the ground once. Kenyan Drake, a guy who's going to be outside a little bit more. They're going to try and get him the ball on the jet sweep or on some screens, and he'll have to make some guys miss. That's a little bit tougher in a game like you saw on Saturday. I think Nick Saban talked earlier today about they're still trying to get him to be more consistent and not try and take the ball to the house every time he touches the ball, and that might have been another problem this week. But I think as the season goes on, you'll start to see him become more comfortable in his role.
And how about Damien Harris and Bo Scarbrough? How do you think they're going to be added into the mix, especially as defenses are really going to be preparing for Derrick Henry?
Yeah, well, you're never going to get through the SEC with just one running back, and you're rarely going to get through it with 2 or even 3. Guys are going to get banged up. They're going to get smaller injuries, especially if they're going to have a workload like what Derrick Henry's had. I think Alabama's done a good job of limiting him in some of the games like Louisiana Monroe and Middle Tennessee State to keep him fresh, but that's still 26 carries against a really good Georgia team and a lot of contact that he's taken. So you're going to have to see Kenyan Drake take a bigger part of the offense. You're going to have to see Damien Harris play a little bit more. And Bo Scarbrough, the guy who probably looks the most like Derrick Henry on the team, he's probably also going to be able to take a few more carries down the road as he gets to be more comfortable with his role.
All right, let's move on to the defense. The front 7, they've been talked about
Dominant.
In the offseason, in the spring. They've been compared to championship-style teams that Alabama has had in the past. You just said it. They have been dominant. And a couple weeks ago when they said they shut out Louisiana Monroe 34-0, Reggie Ragland told the team no points. We asked him about that last week. Going against Georgia, you can't really tell the defense no points, but 10 points is like nothing almost against a Georgia squad. What did we learn about the front 7 playing Georgia?
I think this week just solidified the fact that this is maybe the best front 7 in the country. and maybe the best front seven that Alabama's had since the 2011 defense. I don't necessarily know if it's as good as that defense or better than that defense, but I think it's as good as any of the units that have come since that 2011 unit. And it's really was able to show that. You see, Georgia barely even tried to run the ball against that front seven. Nick Chubb had 21 carries. A lot of those were in the second half once the game was kind of already decided. It looked like they were trying to get him some yards to break the record there in front of the home crowd. Wisconsin had 21 carries total, I think. But the thing that really stood out to me about how dominant this defense was that even with how badly Georgia was struggling in the passing game, they kept going to it because they knew there was just no alternative to run the ball. They weren't going to be effective in doing that and trying to get back in the game.
And in a lot of ways, you mentioned Wisconsin. Georgia and Wisconsin kind of went with the same game plan of changing how they normally do things, which is the running game, because that tells you how much they believe in Alabama's front seven. What are Alabama's keys to victories against Arkansas, another team that's good at the run game and is also another smash mouth type football game?
Right. I think that Brandon Allen, the quarterback for Arkansas, has probably been a little bit better, or at least had to shoulder a little bit more of the load on offense than most people thought he would this year. But this is still a team that is built around its running attack and built around a play action, has a massive offensive line. I don't know if this is going to be a bigger challenge than Georgia was, but it's going to be another one. And playing two physical games back-to-back in the SEC, you might start to see a little bit of an effect on Alabama's defense there. I think fortunately for Alabama, they have enough bodies that they can rotate in and out there that it might not make a huge difference. Like Darren Payne, you saw the true freshman, was one of the most effective defenders that Alabama had against Georgia. He might see a little bit more time, as well as some of the other guys beyond just your A'Shawn Robinson and your Jaron Reeds.
I think that's one of the most amazing things about Alabama's defense is how many guys they can change in and change out. It's almost every play, if not every other play, they are changing players, and they have that deep of a roster that they can move down and keep guys fresh.
Right. It's the same thing at linebacker. Reggie Ragland stays out there pretty much all the time, but they have other inside linebackers. When they go against a spread team, you'll see Reuben Foster out there, a guy who can run sideline to sideline a little bit more, is a little bit more comfortable in the passing game. And against a team like Arkansas or against like Georgia, Sean Deion Hamilton came in and played really well.
All right, that's all the time we have right now for Inside the Tide, but when we come back, we are going to answer your questions that came from the Tidesports.com message board, so stay with us. Welcome back to Tide Sports TV. It is now time to take your questions. We get these from Tidesports.com message board as well as Twitter. You can tweet us at TideSportsTV. So the first one, I'm going to have Cecil answer this first. Almost halfway through the regular season, what is the team's potential and what are key areas of concern?
Well,
you hate these questions. That's why I'm giving them to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Their potential is they could win all their games or they could win some of them. They could win them all. I mean, they're capable of that. So that's the upper limit of their potential. They'll have to play well, have to play like they played against Georgia. If they give that kind of performance, if they're positive in the giveaway takeaway, if they are able to control both lines of scrimmage, if they don't hurt themselves in the passing game, they can beat every team, certainly between here and the SEC championship game. If not, if they revert and play like they played against Ole Miss, they can lose a couple of those games. But they have plenty of potential.
And that would be the area of concern, is getting complacent.
Yeah, is not channeling your emotions, is not playing with focus, as Coach Saban likes to say. And obviously Jake had a good game, but he's got to show that he can consistently put together a string of 3, 4, 5 games. You've got to stay healthy. You've got to improve in some areas. Still like to see J.K. Scott punt the ball better if you're an Alabama fan. You'd still like to see another receiver develop. So all those things, that's all part of process of growing during the season.
Since you just mentioned the receiver situation, last week you were very clear to fans that there is no more Amari Cooper to let it go. Calvin Ridley steps up this week. Question from the message board, is Calvin Ridley becoming a go-to receiver, or do you expect it to be a different guy every week?
Well, some of that's dictated by what the defense does. Defense can always double a guy and make a different guy the go-to receiver if they want to. But he has that ability. I think that the more he and Jake play together, the more comfortable they'll get. They need somebody else to step up. They still miss Robert Foster, I think, but he likes to go to Richard Mullaney as well. But sure, Calvin's no reason that he was the number one high school receiver last year.
Ben, what did you think about Calvin this weekend?
I thought that was by far his best game, obviously, as a freshman. I think that each of the last 2 games, he's really shown significant improvement. As we mentioned in the last segment, Alabama's totally rebuilding its passing game, and Calvin Ridley is a guy that they can build the passing game around for the next couple of years to come.
We'll stay on the passing game for one more question. Is O.J. Howard not open, or is he not being targeted? And this person wants to know, why isn't UA throwing to him more?
I think he might be a victim of his own success at this point in the season. Earlier on, he looked like Alabama's best receiver, and I think that ended up on film, and I think that there are some teams that are able to take notice of that. I think that as the season goes along, you'll start to see his role kind of even out a little bit more.
Yeah, there. When you say targeted, that's really what you don't want in an offense is to come out of the huddle and say, I'm throwing to OJ no matter what, no matter if he's covered. He needs to run his routes. If he's the primary receiver, if he can get open, they'll throw it to him. If he's the check down guy, they need to check down to him if he's open. But again, it's not a situation where it's not like in the 3rd grade where you got in the huddle and say, all right, we're going to throw it to Ben. That's not how that works.
I want the ball.
He does. And Ben will go after it now. There's no question about that.
And with this being a first-year quarterback, Jay Coker, at starting, all these relationships being built with the different receivers, we may see it spread out throughout the season. Richard Mullaney, as you said earlier, he looked like he was a great target as well. So
yeah, that's what you want. You want our Darius Stewart to be more consistent catching the ball. Let him be targeted some. You want some of the younger guys to continue to develop. You want to see Cam Sims and Chris Black get healthier. There weren't a lot of targets in this game because they didn't throw the ball 16 times. You throw it 32 times, you'd have seen a lot more guys get targeted, I guess.
Rainy conditions change that, which brings us to a funny kind of question. Should Alabama fans pray for more rain?
I don't know any rain dances.
I'll let Ben handle the religious question.
I don't know any rain dances, and I'm certainly not going to do one on TV.
No?
And first of all, let me commend the University of Georgia for the condition of the field all day. Mm-hmm. It was not a factor in terms of getting muddy, getting slick. Obviously when it's raining like that, you're not going to have the same footing, but I thought the field held up really well, and so commendation to them for having good drainage. And I don't want to have to walk through the rain every game, so I doubt the fans want to sit in it. But
I was just going to say, fans are not praying for rain.
If you have to play in it, you have to play in it.
My shoes were wet until we got back to the hotel.
Yeah, we tried to warn you about that too.
He's the rookie.
Yeah.
All right, we're moving on to our Twitter question. How improved is Arkansas? Will there be relief syndrome for Bama, or was Saturday just the beginning? So it's a double.
I don't watch Arkansas closely enough to say how improved they are. That's a nice win to go to Knoxville and beat Tennessee. And don't lose sight in all the Tennessee jokes. That's a good win. You go in there and Arkansas's coming off some losses as well, some disappointment. They fought Texas A&M. People talk about how tough Texas A&M is going to be, and Arkansas fought them to overtime. So they are a big, tough, physical team. Alabama should be favored at Bryant-Denny. They are favored by 16 points, but any team in the SEC has talent. I'll be interested to see if Arkansas's improved defensively, but I think that they probably are on an uptick and feeling a little more confident with a win at Tennessee.
I think that Arkansas kind of falls into the same trap that Georgia fell into, where their game plan is probably going to play into what Alabama wants to do defensively. I think that LSU might have a better chance of breaking the Alabama defense later on this year. Arkansas is a really good team still, I think, despite some of the problems they've had earlier this year, but I don't think they're going to be good enough to beat Alabama.
And I think to answer the second part of the question about having relief syndrome, obviously Arkansas is not a team you can go to sleep on. So if there is any relief syndrome, that would be a bad idea to do, especially at home in Bryant-Denny Stadium.
I'm not asking Nick Saban about that question.
Well, that's why again, that's why he's yelling today. Is that he doesn't want. As sure as they have a big win, he's going to shout on Monday. Period.
Yeah, you don't want to get complacent this week. Well, that's all the time we have for Tide Sports TV here at Wilhagan's. We are here every Monday at 6 p.m. You can come join us. Send us your questions to the tidesports.com message board, or you can tweet us on Twitter at Tide Sports TV. Thanks for joining us.